I could see at least two teams missing out with a winning record. Houston and Kansas City.
Really, it's going to be a battle of the two offenses in this case. So I predict a high-scoring game.
This is what they get for firing Brian Flores. You remember that 2021 season when the Dolphins won 7 in a row with Brian Flores just to get booted out of the playoffs and then terminated on Black Monday. Why would they even do that?
Offseason in terms of talent-wise, when they got Tyreek Hill, so they had the right talent the following year. If they had the exact same offseason with Brian Flores as the coach, how much different would have it gone? I don't know if we necessarily would have.
It would have been way different if Brian Flores.
It would have been better.
It would have been different with Brian Flores because he has a winning culture defense, but the offensive was pretty much god awful.
Back in, like, say, Madden, the original Madden 25 franchise mode, it would have been generated during one of the off seasons. You get a random, like, Kurt Warner coming out of retirement or Ray Lewis coming out of retirement storyline. Good evening, folks. It is Tuesday evening. We're back after a fun wild card weekend. We're back with my co-host Agent Warrior X to talk about the wild card round and preview the divisional round. Tonight, my camera's a little, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's a glitch. So we're getting auto tonight. But we are still here. We're still going to talk about the playoffs, and there have been a few other moves made as far as coaches go since last Tuesday. So we'll talk about that as well.
Good evening, folks. This is Agent Warrior X, a co-host of NFL Pickems. Today is Tuesday, January 13th, 2026. I'm your co-host, Agent Warrior X, and this was very interesting in terms of the coach terminations. We had Mike Tomlin, after 19 years, officially stepping down, a.k.a. resign as head coach. In my perspective, Nikki, we have seen this time and time when it comes to long tenured. You remember how the Seahawks parted ways with Pete Carroll and then ultimately moving to the Vegas Raiders. And after one season, he hasn't been the same since.
But we've also, hey, Mike Tomlin, though, as far as he goes, it's pretty much the end. It's the end of an era in Pittsburgh, and it's pretty crazy to think about it. We've had Chuck Noll, Bill Cowher, Mike Tomlin as head coaches for the Pittsburgh Steelers. That's stretched over decades. For some teams like the Cleveland Browns, they've had 5-year stretches with 3 head coaches.
You can name a few, like Kevin Stefanski, Freddie Kitchens, Ken Dorsey. You can name a few head coach or GM tenders on the Cleveland Browns, but ultimately hasn't been good since. The only positive I could say about the Cleveland Browns is that Kevin Stefanski was their really good head coach, ultimately turning him into a not so great offense when Deshaun Watson was on that team, and ultimately when Shedeur Sanders played on the field, not so great.
But in Mike Tomlin's case, it's interesting because now you're talking about one of the best head coaches in NFL history, 19 seasons in the league. Say what you want to say about the playoff shortcomings, but 19 seasons without a losing record. 2 Super Bowl appearances and a Super Bowl win. Yes, those 2 Super Bowls came in the earlier stretch, but to go 19 seasons without a losing season and have a Super Bowl win is incredible. Is an incredible accomplishment that only some of the great that more rivals some of the great coaches like Don Shula's, Chuck Knowles, Vince Lombardi's, Bill Belichick's of the world.
Whatever you think of Mike Tomlin's career resume when it comes to winning coaches, he's going to go down there outside of football. He's going to go down there with a few managers or head coaches such as Greg Popovich, Joe Torre, and you name it. Greg Popovich, Joe Torre. You can
Phil
name.
Jackson.
Thank you, Phil Jackson. You can name every head coach or manager on each sport with winning records. They're gonna
If
go
you want
down there.
both, here's
They're gonna,
one for both. Pat Riley from the NBA. He did it with both.
Pat Riley, Pep Guardiola for the Premier League. By the way, congratulations on Manchester City for winning that game against Newcastle in the first leg of the Carabao Cup. You could name every single manager, GM, head coach who has a winning record, but Mike Tomlin should definitely be up there in the books with Don Shula, Vince Lombardi, Bill Belichick, Pete Carroll. You can name, oh yeah, and John Harbaugh. Don't forget John Harbaugh too.
You're right. And I saw this proposed. I don't think it's going to happen, but could you imagine if John Harbaugh were to be the Steelers coach and Mike Tomlin the Ravens coach? I don't think that's going to happen, but that would be hilarious.
Speaking of John Harbaugh, we've got some updates about him. He had a private lunch with Chris Shula, the brother of John Mara, the owner for the New York Giants, and he said that he went to John Harbaugh's house on Sunday to have lunch with him in Baltimore. Few days later, we had him with having a phone call with former head coach Brian Dable, encouraging him to be that part of that Giants franchise. And of course, Tom Coughlin, greatest coach of the two Super Bowl wins, gave the Giants a Super Bowl victory for 2007, 2011, encourages John Harbaugh to join the Giants alongside a future Hall of Famer, Eli Manning.
Yep. But so, yeah, it's the end of an era in Pittsburgh, and we still got to wait and see what happens because there's still a lot of teams are still in the feeling out process. They're just getting to talk to coaches. Nothing is official yet, but we will definitely keep an eye on it, and that'll definitely be something to talk about. And speaking of that, Mike McDaniel was asked about less than 24 hours after the wild card round pick'ems before we had the chance to get to it. And we both said that the Dolphins should move on, and they made their decision less than 24 hours after the last episode to part ways with McDaniel. And funny, the Cleveland Browns apparently are interviewing him.
You know who's also interviewing John Harbaugh? The Falcons. If Matt Ryan decides to pull the trigger on that, here is my cons on that. John Harbaugh to the Falcons. He would want his new quarterback, in spite of Michael Penix and Kirk Cousins. Sure, you have a great running back of Bijan Robinson, and of course a great defense of James Pierce Jr. and the secondary. But in my perspective, they paid way too much money for that. And thankfully, after Black Monday, not only the Falcons has fired Rasheed Morris, that GM for the Falcons, and of course Rich McKay, who has been there since 2003. At about time, Arthur Blank decided to clean house after all that.
Well, yep. So now we just got to wait and see. There's a lot of teams that are going to be discussed now. The Dolphins have an opening, Browns opening, Cardinals, Giants. I mean, so many. No, there's a few teams I'm
Nine
forgetting.
teams are searching for a head coach for this offseason.
Yes, that's true. But the real interesting part over the past week was the wild card round because we started off hot with two close NFC matchups, starting with the Rams and Panthers, and then the Bears and Packers, man. And that continued into Sunday with the Bills and Jaguars epic finish. Eagles 49ers kind of played out as expected. Patriots Chargers was Patriots won, and Texans Steelers not the most competitive game, but it was still interesting nonetheless.
I kid you not. That Chargers and Patriots game, Justin Herbert played terrible. The offense looked terrible. And because of that, after 24 hours later, they terminated Greg Roman.
I mean, so now this is the second time in the past, what was it, like 2023 season, the
Yeah,
Ravens moved
it's
on from him, and now it's happening again with the Chargers. But In this case, we got to talk a little bit about Justin Herbert because now they're starting to form a pattern with Herbert. First playoff loss, okay, that was the team's collapse. I'm not going to put that on one specific
It was all on
individual.
Brandon Staley. It was all on Brandon Staley, and that secondary defense really messed up badly.
Right. So that was a situation I more so look at the team. But then it happened last year in a game against the Texans. They theoretically could have won. And then this year they get absolutely destroyed by the Patriots without a fight in a game that they could have won because the Patriots offense did not perform up to standard. They could have won that game if they played better offensively, but they didn't. So now the question is, do we have that discussion about Justin Herbert not being able to perform in the playoffs? I think so.
Justin Herbert is 0-3 in playoff appearances. Since Brandon Staley maliciously ruined that, when John Harbaugh came, that Texans defense was getting up there. And then this year, the first half was just a defensive game all around for both the Chargers and Patriots. Ultimately, for the Packers and the Bears, there was no excuse. There was no excuse for you to blow a 20-21 nothing lead against your division rival. The team that you hated the most has now been sacred into the wind because of the defense, and despite the injuries of Micah Parsons and Tucker Kraft, this has ultimately become one of the worst blown leads in quite a while for now.
I mean, yeah, this was such a shame right here because the Chargers, you got Justin Herbert, who's a very talented quarterback in the regular season, a top 10 currently, but there's been the struggle to win big games and now 0-3 in the playoffs. It's like, now, granted, I know the offensive line had its woes, but at some point in time, the common denominator is struggling to get past the opening round with Justin Herbert. At some point in time, he's got to find a way to step up and overcome that adversity. I think one, he does need a real deal number one weapon, and they do need to stay healthy at the offensive line going forward. But it does, to some degree, Herbert gets the blame, but I don't think it's all of it. But it's something we do got to talk about.
The next game I want to talk about is the Panthers and Rams. It was a close game, don't get me wrong. Now I understand why the Panthers won the NFC South, because over the past second in the past games before the playoffs, the Panthers have been grinding it out.
Absolutely. And they did that in this one too. And they made it a close game. The Rams had to rely on a 2-minute drill type drive by Matthew Stafford, who's become a master of the 2-minute drill. And he found a way to get the Rams to win this game. But ultimately, man, the Panthers put up a fight. You even had Mike Jackson got an interception as well, showing why that defense was one of the better defenses entering the playoffs. And hey, you had Hubbard had 2 touchdowns, and Bryce
Chuba
Young
Hubbard,
played.
yep.
Yep, and Bryce Young played a respectable game, even earning the respect of the Ram players after the game. So that at least gives the Panthers some momentum headed into next year. And for the Rams, them being the more experienced team in this situation, having a former Super Bowl winning coach, Super Bowl winning quarterback, a real deal number one weapon, Puka Nakua, a Devontae Adams who's still a good number 2 option at this stage in his career, a solid run game. They just were too much for the Panthers, who have something going, but they still need just a little bit more going forward.
And the next game I want to talk about is the Bills and Jaguars. That game was actually pretty good. The way how the first half turned out between Trevor Lawrence and Josh Allen was no big surprise. Trevor Lawrence with Travis Etienne and Josh Hines Allen, you could name every player, including Brian Thomas Jr. They were this close. And Cam Little, after all that 10-second runoff and with no timeouts remaining, he missed a crucial field goal attempt when it mattered the most before this first half ended. But by the second half, the Bills showed up because of the defense. Josh Allen still showcasing Josh Allen things. But now this could potentially be an easy path for either one of the teams. The Bills and the Patriots for the AFC. For the NFC, the easy path now is either the Bears or the Seahawks. And the final game I want to mention is the Philadelphia Eagles versus the 49ers. I am disappointed and pissed off about your team. Your team messed up terribly, didn't you? AJ Brown dropped a crucial pass, and that was inexcusable. That AJ Brown pass was inexcusable. And on top of all that, the defense had been doing their part. I will give credit to that. But the offense wasn't good enough. This was the similar situation what you did 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when you when you lost out of the NFC East to the Dallas Cowboys after a late season collapse. Similar to the Buccaneers, you got blown out, but this time around, you lost in a close game thanks to Run CMC and Brock Purdy. By the way, prayers to George Kittle because of that crucial torn ACL, torn Achilles he had. And this has to be the most impressive win for the 49ers because without George Kittle, without Fred Warner, without Nick Bosa, that, in my opinion, was one of the most impressive wins we've ever seen. And I said you vouch for right. And look how that leads you to. It was close, but it wasn't close enough. And then a couple of hours later, you terminated him. Let this be a lesson to the Philadelphia Eagles fans that never vouch for right ever again. Rather, it's a Jets QB coach or an assistant coach. Kevin Patullo, at best, is an assistant coach, but keep him as far away as offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator.
Well, let's start with this. As far as the 2023 season, here's the similarities. 11-win season following a Super Bowl run, first round exit. But that's where some of the similarities end. There were some differences. For one, the talent was better, but the offense was much worse. Because even Brian Johnson's offense was better than Kevin Patullo. You can just see with the lack of production with A.J. Brown, mind you. Even with Brian Johnson, the pass-happy Brian Johnson, who we complained didn't bring a run game, they still got A.J. Brown involved in the pass game. They still had a couple 30-plus point games before the collapse, so they at least, even in the Cardinals' loss, their offense still showed up. But this was worse off offense-wise. I mean, I don't even know how to put it, but ultimately, the 49ers, the team that's been resilient all season long, did so again. And the Eagles, the team that couldn't get it going offensively, had their offense be their downfall again. And ultimately, Kevin Patullo was rightfully terminated, which is good because there's a lot of offensive people looking for an offensive coordinator job. They're going to want that Philly spot because of the talent there. So I'm sure there's
That's
at least
true, but I think in my perspective, I don't see you guys getting Mike McDaniel. I'm sorry. But I, however, want to say this. The Philadelphia Eagles are wasting the talents of A.J. Brown. They wasting the talents of Jalen Hurts, and they're maliciously ruining a power-hungry Saquon Barkley, especially that Madden curse he had. Let's look at the Kevin Patullo losses he did, shall we? The first game he lost to Denver. Close game, lost by field goal.
right.
The
Defense
Giants
got burnt out fourth quarter.
The Giants, prime time, while New York Comic Con was still going around, lost by double-digit points. Thanks to two people of Jackson Dart and Cam Scottaboo and Cordell Flott. By the way, Dart and Scottaboo we trust in 2026 if we have the head coaches, because I
Now,
still believe that the Giants on paper with the offense will look slightly better.
and if the
And
offense would have just been better in that game, even if they would have lost a close game, high-scoring game, it would have been more bearable. But to get blown out by double digits, that's actually ridiculous.
you know what's also ridiculous? That game against the Dodgers in the divisional round against the Dodgers. You know which game I'm talking about. Bryce Harper, Kyle Schwarber, or Ryan Kirkley.
That's what happens when you have a player who can't deliver in the clutch. But
Oh yeah,
moving
did I
right
also
along.
mention about the Chargers in overtime? We didn't mention that. Jalen Hurts was playing his butt off, but ultimately got picked off. Y'all lost to the Cowboys, but before Thanksgiving,
And the same
when the
trend there. The offense fell apart and the defense got burnt out.
exactly. And the final game I'm gonna mention is the Washington Commanders, who by the way doesn't have Jaden Daniels. Resting your starters was a big mistake. If you desperately want the 2 seed, you're better off facing the Packers, not the 49ers.
Big mistake. And while we're still on the subject of that, I do got to give credit to the Chicago Bears for their mental fortitude in that game. It was easy for the Bears to let that aspect of the team who had their number for years in big games being up on them at home. It was easy to go, oh, here we go again. We just can't beat them. They could have easily mentally conceded, but they kept faith and they stayed confident. They didn't let the past jinx of the Packers get to them. They kept it together. They pulled off the comeback in the fourth quarter, and they got the win. And the Packers, this was well fitting of their season. Hot start, looking like they could be something special, only to collapse in the fourth quarter, both in terms of December of the regular season and the fourth quarter of the game against the Bears.
And especially losing to your divisional round stings more than anything. And the final game I want to mention is the Steelers and Texans. You know what's familiar? The familiar team that we know in terms of that Texans defense is the New York Giants defense back in 2007 when you had Antonio Pierce, you had Jay Alford, you had Michael Strahan. Those were the best defenders on that team. FYI, did I also mention CJ Stroud was sluggish in the first half?
Yes, I mean, that's crazy because you would think when you look at the score box, you would be praising the quarterback. The final score was 30-6. 9 times out of 10, you would. But in this game, this is the one time a team wins by double-digit points that you don't praise the quarterback. Because CJ Stroud played like the guy on the team with 6 points. But ultimately, the Texans defense had multiple turnovers. They gave Rodgers looked sluggish in that game, which we'll get to that in a second. But I feel like it's a shame because if CJ Stroud was just even a tad bit below what he was his rookie season, the Texans could easily be contenders. But with performances like that, there's a lot of concern about the Texans headed into the Patriots game, as well as some concern about the Patriots. But I think we should bring up Aaron Rodgers real quick.
Which is why I would say for Aaron Rodgers, it's time. It's time to hang up the cleats. It's time to hang up your helmet. It's time to hang up your your style of play. At this point, you are a future Hall of Fame. We're all, including myself, still proud of you for your amazing accomplishments throughout your career with Mike McCarthy, Brett Favre, and you can name every player on the Packers with that Aaron Rodgers team was legitimate the best. But I think, in my opinion, it's time to retire.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it is. I mean, we saw last night it throughout the season. We saw moments where he still flashed some brilliance, but we had moments where he looked sluggish. And in a game against the high pressure defense in the Texans, he looked off. Like he averted back to Jets form. I think it's like, look, Rodgers even said going into the season his goal was to make the playoffs. I don't think he'll admit it, but I think he knew in the back of his mind playoffs was more realistic than Super Bowl. So he got that goal. I think that's a better way to go out than you did with the Jets. Go out where you can still go out on a somewhat respectable note and call it a day.
Why I would say that pass the torch to Will Howard so he could bring the new era to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now on to the divisional games, and then there was eight. The Denver Broncos
Yes.
versus the Buffalo Bills. Buffalo was coming off a very impressive victory. Yes, you may have James Cook. You may have Keon Coleman. You may have the secondary defense and a sluggish offense in the first half of this. In the second half, they pulled through. But going up against the Denver Broncos defense makes me think, okay, You're going up against one of the top teams in the AFC West. You're going up against the top team in the AFC. But ultimately for them, when Bo Nix shows up in the second half, he looks elite. The same situation he did with the Giants when they were down by 20, 15 point, down by 15 points. Ultimately came back at the last minute because the defense was caught napping. And for the Buffalo Bills, this is no brainer. This was their final stadium of the season, final year at the stadium at the at the re- at the high
Orchard Park.
at Orchard Park. Thank you. But now the new stadium's gonna look very good. But if I had to choose one, come then, who will go back to the AFC Championship, I'm going to say that Buffalo will overcome Denver. There's one positive about that: no Chiefs, no Lions, no Eagles. The boogeyman was officially casted away because of the situations those teams had. But considering how Josh Allen still plays out in the playoffs so far, I think he has a good shot of going to the Super Bowl this year.
This could very well indeed, because I started thinking about it earlier in the day. I'll give a small spoiler alert. I could see 3 of the 4 games, potentially the road team winning out of the 4 games this week. And with this Buffalo Denver game, this could be one of them. I know that tech within Denver, it gives them the advantage, that mile high air, but we have seen teams beat them before. The Baltimore Ravens with Joe Flacco, who were in kind of a somewhat similar position. Flacco had been there for a minute. They went on the road and they upset the Broncos at Mile High. We know that Jacoby Jones touchdown followed by the interception in game winner in overtime. We remember 2014, Andrew Luck and the Colts upset them at Mile High. So they are beatable even with that advantage. In Buffalo, with Josh Allen and that team, they got the edge there because with Bo Nix, he's been an odd quarterback this season. It's been a roller coaster ride. He'll be up and soaring high 1 minute, next minute he'll kind of crash down, and the Broncos would skate by with a win.
You know what's crazy? The fact that Buffalo annihilated them last year with Bo Nix and Sean Payton made it to the first playoffs for the first time in over 10 in nearly a decade. I think I think Buffalo has the upper advantage in terms of the offense.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the offensive advantage is where it's going to come in handy in this one. That's why I got the Bills winning this game and going back to the conference championship game. Now, who will be their opponent? That's an interesting question because I think this next game is going to be a lower scoring game based off what we saw from the 2 offenses, respectively, in the wild card round, that being the Texans and the Patriots.
You know what's crazy? Most of the time, sometimes in the playoffs, it's mostly defensive games. The Texans have an elite defense. The Patriots have the elite offense. And ultimately, for them, I could see something play out. We may have a low scoring game in the first half. We may have a high scoring game in the second half. Ultimately, I see this playing out in one lopsided Texans over Patriots because the Texans' defense is still elite. Even if the Patriots still has a great run, but ultimately, I don't see the Patriots going back to the AFC Championship for the first time in over 7 years. Yes, Drake may have gotten himself an MVP for the next couple months, but I don't think it's going to be enough against the Texans defense. Especially when you face up against Will Anderson Jr. With CJ Stroud, with Nico Horner and Christian Kirk, you could name anything related to their players, but I see this one slider because the Texans will have the slider advantage over the Patriots.
And with that being said, here's the thing where I think I actually do agree. Here's where they have the edge because while Drake May could be the regular season MVP, we saw in that game against the Chargers, it looks like he let the playoff jinx and the lights get to him a little bit, which does happen. Sometimes even some of the best quarterbacks first go around the playoffs doesn't go so great. Remember Ben Roethlisberger's first year? they barely beat the Jets, only to get destroyed by the Patriots at home. Or
Yep.
Peyton Manning, his first time ago, actually first 2 years, they went one and done against the Dolphins. And the first go around was Dan Marino's final game win as a starter. So
You know what
sometimes,
else? Remember Eli Manning's first year when he was drafted to the Giants in
oh yeah,
2004?
against the Panthers, they got shut out.
Exactly. They got shut out. Then they missed the playoffs that year. The following year, they won the NFC East in 2005, but then 2006 came the Philadelphia Eagles. And then 2007, 2 years later, guess how that turned out? It
Yep.
was Tom Coughlin's last chance. It was his last chance to get them back to the playoffs. But he did, but the organization did not expect it to go to the Super Bowl, ultimately destroying the best team in the AFC, and that helmet catch will be forever remembered as the greatest play of all time. Ultimately, for the Giants, winning the Super Bowl because of one thing: the defense. So we're seeing a shade similarity to the Houston Texans to the '07 Giants defense.
Yep. And with Drake May, I don't think this is the year where he could shine in the playoffs. There's still potentially, well, someday down the line he could have his playoff moment, but first season in the playoffs, like we said, guys like Roethlisberger, Eli's first go, Peyton's first go. Sometimes, quarterbacks have a bad first go in the playoffs and they have to learn and do better. John Elway struggled in the playoffs early on. It happens. So, but Drake May, what I saw against the Chargers, I think that Texans defense will be too much. And they could find a way to win this game as a result, even in Foxborough.
Can you imagine if Jackson Dart makes his first playoff game? It'll be just as similar to what Eli Manning did.
So that's why I lean toward the Houston Texans in this one to move on to their first AFC championship game. But I think that's where the magical ride would end against the Buffalo Bills.
Here's the problem. In the regular season, if that happens, if the Bills go up against the Texans, this is where the problem lies. Because the Bills have a really tough time facing the Texans when it comes to the defense. Next up, we have the San Francisco 49ers versus the Seattle Seahawks at Lou Mine Field for the first time in over a decade. If you want to talk about loudest football stadiums in the NFL, you think of Arrowhead, you think of Lincoln Financial, you think of MetLife, you think of Lou Mine Field, or better, Heinz Field. You can name every single loudest stadium, but in my perspective, Lou Mine Field is considered one of the loudest stadiums in the country. But Sam Darnold, we know, sucked in the playoffs when he was on the Vikings. We know that. But this is a completely different story this year. Going up against a 49ers team led by Christian McCaffrey, Brock Purdy, and a crippled defense, I could see this as a one lopsided. Seahawks over 49ers to get back to the NFC Championship for the first time in over 10 years. And I'll tell you why. JSN looks elite. Cooper Cup looks still elite. Kenneth Walker is still doing his part. You even got Leonard Williams, who's also doing his part too, and so does Julian Love. But considering how this plays out, I could see this going Seattle's way. Seattle over 49ers to get back to the NFC Championship for the first time in 10 years.
And man, the one thing for the 49ers that's going to hurt them the most is injuries. They've made it this far, but sometimes you just can't overcome the injuries. It can be too much for you. Switching sports for a second, see that Houston Rockets team that one year they had T-Mac, Yao. Remember, they had a bunch of injuries. They still had a great regular season, but
They
come
still had
playoff time,
look.
I think it was the
Even the New
Lakers
Jersey
had their
Nets,
number.
even the New Jersey Nets before Vince Carter came, they still had a great playoff run because of Jason Kidd's best effort.
Right. But for the back to the 49ers, the one parallel it has to those examples is they have an good talented team, but they got a lot of key injuries. Now you're going against a Seahawks team who has a phenomenal defense, and you're down George Kittle. Christian McCaffrey is going to be their best hope, but even that's going to be tough. Now, the one potential advantage for the Niners is Sam Darnold in the playoffs. This is only his second start in the playoffs, but he can still be prone to making mistakes at time, which disqualified him from MVP contention despite the team success. Now, Darnold is a good quarterback with that team, but not an elite quarterback. But with the Niners injuries, I think that's the one edge the Seahawks have, particularly Niners offense versus Seahawks defense. And that will be the factor in the Seahawks going to the NFC Championship game.
Yep. And then there was one game. Bears versus Rams. Matt Stafford nearly choked in the first round. The defense nearly choked. The Bears defense gave a really tough time against the Packers. The offense looks amazing. The defense look amazing. However, considering how Caleb Williams versus Matt Stafford will be a slightly tough time, but I will consider them out. I could see the one team heading back to the NFC Championship is not the Rams. Bears will finally make it back to the NFC Championship for the first time in over a decade. The last time the Bears made it was in 2010, ultimately coming up short to the Packers with Rodgers. The Giants made it to the NFC Championship in 2011, and Dallas, it hasn't been in the NFC Championship since 95, not 96, 1995. If this happens, I will rejoice the Bears because I feel for the Bears. For a very long time since that double doink against the Philadelphia Eagles, there will be two teams left to go back to the NFC Championship: the Giants and the Cowboys. Bears over Rams.
That is a tough game. I think this is going to be the game of the week for sure. You have at this point, arguably the two best teams, the two most complete teams in the NFC at this stage in the playoffs, with all due respect to the Seahawks. Because you got the Bears, they have a pretty good defense too, with guys like Montez Sweat, CJ Gardner-Johnson, if he clears protocol and he can play. And then you got, of course, on offense, Caleb Williams with Ben Johnson has a confidence we haven't seen yet. In first year, kind of struggled, but year two, confidence is flowing. DeAndre Swift, when utilized, can be an excellent running back. You got DJ Moore, still a good number one option. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. I remember the first, I think it's the tight end we're talking, but Ozdune or whatever it is, pretty solid option. And then the Rams, great offense, but their defense, solid, but not the best unit in the world. And Matthew Stafford has at moments played like an MVP, but at moments he's had his shortcomings. See the Falcons Monday night game. See the regular season against the Panthers. See how they almost let the Panthers get to them. And the Bears, just that mentality, that Ben Johnson mentality, has just gotten this team to excel to another level, to always believe in themselves and always play the game for a full 4 quarters. I could potentially see this maybe going to overtime, but I'm going to take the Bears to get the upset and maybe be a dark horse to at least make the Super Bowl. Maybe.
You know what's crazy? If you want to talk about divisional matchup moments, let's talk about that since we got those things out of the way. The divisional matchups between, if you have good memories when it comes to division NFC divisional rounds or AFC divisional rounds, the best NFC divisional round 18 years ago was the Dallas Cowboys versus the New York Giants, their final game at Cowboy Stadium. Let's just say Tony Romo did his part. Let's just say Eli Manning was getting up there. But ultimately, that defense destroyed Tony Romo and the Cowboys. And Des Bryant while he was at it. The next game I'm gonna say is the Eagles versus Giants, when the Giants were the defending champs. See, this is the thing. When you're a defending champs, you at least had to at least take a divisional round or a championship round exit when you're defending champs. The Eagles in 2009 was an upset. If only Plaxico Burress didn't have that incident in that nightclub and back in '08, they would have gone back to the Super Bowl against either the Patriots or either the Steelers or the Colts. It could have been a dream matchup between the Steelers and Giants. It could have been, and the Giants could have went back to back, or the Steelers with Big Ben doing his part. The third memory I'm going to say is the Cowboys and 49ers. That one dumb play they pulled. What was Ezekiel Elliott doing at center? What was what was the purpose of having a few offensive linemen on top of your screen or bottom of your screen? You could have just thrown a bubble screen, but instead, Zeke got ran over and passed it to Devontae Turpin. What was the purpose of that?
But when it comes to divisional round matchups starting in the 2000s, I'd say 2003, you had the best slate NFC divisional round matchups. You had Rams and Panthers, the greatest show on turf's last year as contenders, versus the young Carolina Panthers team. Steve Smith Sr., Musa Muhammad, Stephen Davis, Jake Delhomme, who was a respectable quarterback with the right talent. Double overtime, Steve Smith Sr. takes it to the house, upsets the Rams. It was their last home playoff game in St. Louis. Then the very next day, the very first playoff game at Lincoln Financial Field, Packers and Eagles go back and forth. It comes down to one memorable play, 4th and 26. Eagles convert, tie the game up. Then Brett Favre just throws up I don't know what he was thinking pass to Brian Dawkins, and then the Eagles kick the game-winning field goal. That was one of the greatest divisional rounds and that was really one of the best playoff runs, period, just for the NFL. And speaking of divisional round, Patriots-Chargers, 06. You think the Chargers, home field advantage, it's going to finally be Schottenheimer's year. The Charger curse hits perfectly. The Chargers get a pick. The player has a brain fart, doesn't fall on the ball. He fumbles it. Patriots get a fresh set of downs, scored the go-ahead touchdown. Then Nate Keating misses a field goal, pretty much ending Marty Schottenheimer's head coaching career. Those are some right there. Now, 2010s, we remember Packers-Cowboys twice. The Packers had the Cowboys number. Particularly the Mason Crosby field goal ended Dak and Zeke's rookie magical run.
Oh, yeah. Did it also mention the Packers, the Giants in 2011? That was amazing with Eli Manning and Mari Manningham.
Yep, you've had that. There's just so many moments that you can think of. Another one. Remember, the Patriots ended Tebow Mania effectively, destroying the Broncos, ultimately leading to the decision to go get Peyton Manning. Then, like I mentioned earlier, the divisional round, the Ravens on that run, that magical run of Joe Flacco, upset the Broncos at Mile High. The Jacoby Jones Hail Mary to tie the game, the interception in overtime, the field goal. And then the Ravens beat the Patriots in Foxborough and beat the 49ers in the Super Bowl. And Ray Lewis goes out on top, and Ed Reed finishes his last game as a Raven as a champion.
Yep. And not to mention, when it comes to teams like these in the divisional rounds, can't believe I'm saying this, but the Giants and the Eagles again in the 2022 playoffs. First off, that matchup between those guys wasn't even close, despite the fact that we upsetted the Vikings in the 2022 playoffs. But I don't think it wasn't even close because you guys had an upper advantage in terms of the defense. The defense, on the other hand, had the upper advantage. The offense had the upper advantage when you have Miles Sanders. And on top of all that, it led you to the NFC Championship for the first time in over a while.
And speaking of that, I just thought about it. 2 memorable Niner moments in the divisional round. Packers 49ers. Packers were the back-to-back NFC champions playing against the 49ers. Terrell Owens was having one of the worst games of his career. The 49ers were still in this game in spite of that. Right at the end, Steve Young goes the Terrell Owens way. Terrell Owens manages to hold on to the ball, catch the game-winning touchdown, and make up for what was at that point the worst game of his career, and made everyone forget about his rotten performance prior to that. Even John Madden noted that on commentary. Flash forward to 2011. Vernon Davis, in his first playoff start, makes the game-winning catch against the New Orleans Saints. Effectively the catch 2 and the catch 3.
Yep, you can name everything. And by the way, what about the Giants game against the 49ers in the I think it was the division champion. No, that was the NFC championship. I'm thinking about the Giants played the in one divisional round game against it was either 1990 or 1986 because the way how we played against one of those teams back then in the 86 hold on. Oh shit. John 1986 playoffs. 1986, 87, yeah. So according to this, the Giants versus the 49ers. We blew out the 49ers in the divisional round. Ultimately going back to the NFC Championship for the first time. I think that 49ers game against the Giants, they have a good memories too. Whether you have Joe Montana, Steve Young, that 49ers versus Giants um playoff rivalry was by far the best one.
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely. Man, there's a plenty of memorable moments. And let's another one. Packers Cardinals 2006, 15-16 season. The overtime matchup. Carson Palmer and that Arizona Cardinals versus the Green Bay Packers. Rodgers double Hail Mary drive to take the game into overtime. Then Larry Fitzgerald puts the icing on the cake in overtime. Speaking of overtime, Bills Chiefs 2, Allen Mahomes 2 in the playoffs. That was when they kept going back and forth. And then in overtime, Kansas City got the win. And that set up Kansas City versus the Cincinnati Bengals AFC Championship Game 1. And we all know that's probably the biggest playoff upset of this decade. Referring to the Bengals and Chiefs.
Yep. Bengals and Chiefs was one of the few great ones. And that game with Chicago and the Giants. You know which game I'm talking about. The 1990 playoffs where that Giants defense, again, that Giants defense back in the 90s was elite. When you have Lawrence Taylor, Harry Carson, Carl Banks, Leonard Marsh, you can name every Giants defender, and they were still elite against Chicago. Which is why I'm going to say that the best playoff rivalry in terms of organizational history-wise, Packers Giants, Giants Patriots, Giants 49ers, and of course, Giants and Commanders. We played against them once in the NFC Championship back in '86, but it was mostly a defensive game, led by Lawrence Taylor and the power-hungry Phil Simms.
Man, and I just realized too, you want to talk about, here's some other memorable moments. 2017 divisional round, both NFC matchups. Falcons pass on first, second, third, and fourth and goal, incomplete at the link. And then the very next day, Vikings dominate the Saints, but the Saints come back, take the lead late. And then Stephon Diggs, miracle touchdown pass at the end, wins it for the Vikings and sets up the Eagles-Vikings infamous NFC Championship game.
That catch was amazing. I kid you not. And not only it was the greatest catch, but it ultimately ended Drew Brees' career.
But speaking of Drew Brees, like his real official end did come in the divisional round between the Buccaneers and Saints in 2020. And speaking of career enders, Dan Marino's career, 1 week after beating Peyton Manning in Manning's first playoff start, came to a horrific end in Jacksonville in the biggest blowout in modern NFL history, playoff-wise, where that Jacksonville Jaguars team with Coach Coughlin, Mark Brunell, Fred Taylor, Jimmy Smith, Keaton McCardell decimated the Miami Dolphins and sent Dan Marino home empty-handed and sent him to the broadcast booth.
Yep. And I know this much. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania is where America started, right? This is off topic. I want to go to Philadelphia one day, not because I want to see the Sixers or the Eagles or the Phillies. It's because I want to go to their barcades. Their barcades in Philadelphia are amazing, especially when you have NFL Blitz in that area.
Oh yeah, there's memories of an old video game, NFL Blitz. That's just came to mind. Do you want
You
to?
know, when it comes to NFL Blitz back then, before the current modern era, I love to let's talk about football video games for a minute because I have something to say about football video games. The football video games I would play as a kid would have to be like the old school Madden. I don't like the new school Madden, by the way.
Nah.
I I like the '04 Madden with Michael Vick. I like NFL Street, NFL Street 2, and of course NFL Bits and backyard NFL football, by the way, NFL backyard football. Because Donovan McNabb was one of the greatest players of the Eagles franchise history. Aside from Randall Cunningham, if you would see what looked like what Donovan McNabb in backyard football was absolutely amazing. Especially the NFL street games where you have Ricky Williams, Shannon Sharp, and other players. And the Giants with Kerry Collins was actually pretty amazing on that team. But ultimately, that NFL street game, if I had to choose the best team to rock with besides the Giants on the NFL street, will have to be either the Eagles or the Dolphins because Donovan McNabb is by far the best quarterback of the NFC East back then.
Yeah, and as far as video games go, and you mentioned Madden '04, the first NFL Street and the second one, which I feel venue wise, the first Street was cooler. In terms of in game gameplay, Street 2 was more fun just from a gameplay standpoint.
And not just don't forget the Game Breaker 2. Game Breaker 2 was the most overpowered game in the entire NFL Street franchise. But the difference in NFL Street is not because of Street Challenge, but you get to play as NFL legends such as Lawrence Taylor or Randall Cunningham. You can name every single legend on NFL, especially Walter Payton, Bo Jackson. You can name every NFL legend and you could play as them.
John Randall.
Sterling Sharp.
Yep. Oh, yeah. Those were fun games. I'll even mention NFL 2K5, which had a ton of depth to it.
I
And it
kid
was
you
a
not.
cheap game, too.
If only 2K or Sega Sports didn't even end their trademark with 2K Sports, it would have been a huge comeback for 2K Sports to have NFL games on it.
Yeah, that would have been, and Madden would have at least been pushed. I'll say this about Madden, though. I feel like Madden '06, there's two. There's the PS2 and original Xbox version, which was actually fun if you turn off the vision and precision. And then there's the Xbox 360 version, which was terrible. But as far as then you had Madden '07, Madden '08 were just eh. Madden '09 was okay, but Madden 10, Madden 11 were really good, and Madden 12 was solid. But then after that, Madden 13 was kind of like the beginning of the end for Madden being a good quality game.
Yep, and at one point, Madden was a 3DS game. Yes, Madden was a Nintendo DS game and a 3DS game, and eventually a Wii game. Speaking of Madden, here's my cover of Madden '06 on the GameCube.
Yep.
Hold on, and make sure I remove the background.
I kind of saw it.
Yeah, there we go. Here's my cover of Madden '06 for the GameCube and NFL Street 2 on the GameCube. I kid you not. This game had had one of the you mentioned earlier has better gameplay depth, right? This game, in my opinion, was is my personal favorite because I like to talk about video games a lot. And by a lot, I'm talking about the best games with Jeremy Shockey. Jeremy Shockey was one of the best players on the Giants, and Exhibit, on the other hand, was the one of the few good rappers outside of football. If you want to talk about hip hop and football, was one of the few greatest players on that team. Now, if you want to talk about overpowered, if you want to talk about old school video games with football related, you should definitely talk about Tecmo Bowl. Tecmo Bowl was by far the best game of all time. Before there was Madden, before there was NFL Blitz, before there was NFL Street, you had Tecmo Bowl. A lot of people was reckoning with the 49ers. A lot of people was reckoning with the Giants. A lot of people was reckoning with the Los Angeles Raiders when you had Bo Jackson. And by the way, Bo Jackson is one of the most overpowered players in the game because he's too fast. And you can name every team to play in Tecmo Bowl, but ultimately Tecmo Bowl is the greatest football game of all time.
Yeah, I mean there are so many of them out there. I mean, but in recent years, man, sports video games just hasn't been the same, in part because video game market has leered more toward army games, so that's kind of the sports market's kind of taken a dip. But even then, they've grown very one-dimensional, a lot of them. Like even 2K, which is a better gameplay than Madden currently, but even 2K's kind of gotten one-dimensional over the years with its features.
Yup, and to be honest with you, Nikki, if only the developers of the game played their cards right in terms of fixing bugs in the gameplay, it would have been better. But sports games nowadays has not been the same since. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for tuning in for NFL Pickles Divisional Round. I'm your co-host, Agent Warrior. Until next time, goodbye, my friends. Have a good night, everyone.
All right, and thanks to Agent Warrior for joining me as always. Thanks to everyone that tuned in. Hope you enjoyed this. Looking forward to seeing how the divisional round plays out and talking about it next week. Until then, have a great night. Catch you next time.